David Harper was dead before anyone knew something had gone wrong. He was 38, lived alone in a small apartment complex in downtown Chicago, and worked as a software consultant. Friends described him as meticulous and quiet, a man who drank black coffee at exactly 8 every morning and kept a perfectly organized desk at work. Neighbors knew him only by brief nods in the hall or the occasional polite smile when he collected his mail. The last confirmed sighting of David was a Tuesday evening. He returned from work around 6:30, carrying a briefcase and a shopping bag. He greeted the doorman, waved at a neighbor walking her dog, and disappeared into his apartment. Nothing about that evening seemed unusual. His apartment was neat, the lights switched off by 9, and the hallway was quiet. Only the faint sound of the television in the neighboring unit drifted through the walls. The next morning, someone noticed David had not come out. The doorman knocked on his door around 8, and when there was no answer, he tried the handle. It was locked, as always. His car remained in the parking lot, and the lights in the apartment were off. Concerned, the doorman called the building manager, who attempted to contact David by phone. The calls went straight to voicemail. By noon, neighbors began whispering, exchanging uneasy glances. Strange noises had been reported the previous night: thuds, a muffled argument, footsteps that didn't match the usual quiet routine of the building. No one thought to investigate at the time, dismissing it as a neighbor's usual habits. By late afternoon, police were called. They forced entry into David's apartment and found him lying on the floor of his living room, a single stab wound in his chest. The apartment was undisturbed otherwise. His laptop remained open on the desk, coffee cup half full, mail stacked neatly. Nothing had been stolen, and nothing seemed out of place. Yet David was gone, and the scene felt quietly wrong. Investigators took photographs and collected evidence carefully. The knife was retrieved from his chest and bagged for analysis. Officers canvassed the apartment complex, questioning neighbors and anyone who might have seen or heard anything unusual. Some neighbors reported hearing a scream or thud around 9:30 the previous evening, but no one could confirm what had happened. A few mentioned seeing a shadowy figure leave the building, but descriptions varied wildly. Detectives discovered David's phone had been untouched, his email activity normal, and no messages sent in the hours leading up to his death suggested conflict. There was no history of threats, no signs of robbery, and nothing indicating a motive. One detail stood out: his front door lock showed no signs of forced entry, suggesting he either knew the killer or let them in willingly. Yet he had no known close contacts who could explain this. The police followed standard procedure: fingerprint analysis, DNA swabs, and interviews with building staff and neighbors. Every routine yielded frustratingly little. The building's security cameras had blind spots near the stairwell, leaving the moments before his death unrecorded. One neighbor recalled seeing a delivery person lingering in the hallway unusually long the day before, but nothing connected them to the crime. Small inconsistencies piled up, each too minor to solve the case, each too strange to ignore. By the end of the week, the investigation stalled. The media reported a quiet man found murdered with no suspect and no apparent motive. Friends and family were left in shock. They remembered David as careful, routine-driven, a man who locked doors, avoided arguments, and rarely spoke about work beyond polite conversations. How someone had entered his apartment, stabbed him, and left undetected remained a mystery. Even in death, David's apartment looked ordinary. The coffee cup sat near the keyboard untouched. His shoes lined up neatly by the door. The mail remained stacked. Only the lifeless body in the middle of the room suggested anything had gone wrong. The rest of the apartment seemed to hold its breath, as if hiding the truth behind closed doors. Neighbors whispered for weeks afterward. They remembered odd noises, footsteps when the hall was empty, doors opening softly in the night, brief shadows where no one stood. The kind of small details no one notices until someone is gone. but no witness could say for certain who had come or gone. The case remained open but unsolved. Investigators filed reports. Fingerprints matched no known criminals, and security footage revealed only familiar faces passing through the building. David Harper's life ended in quiet routine, and his death left no trace, no explanation, and no answer. Even today, some residents of the apartment complex pause at his old door. They listen for noises that shouldn't be there, remember shadows that never belonged, and wonder how a man could be gone so completely, leaving nothing behind but a neatly stacked life and a single violent act that no one could explain. Before we get into the details, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. Each one will keep you guessing until the very end. After David Harper's body was discovered, detectives doubled down on the investigation. Officers returned to the apartment complex, combing hallways, stairwells, and service areas for anything that could have been missed the first time. They knocked on doors, spoke to every resident, and revisited the neighbors who claimed to have heard strange noises the night of his death. Some recalled thuds, a muffled cry, or doors opening and closing when no one should have been around. Others insisted nothing unusual happened, making it impossible to separate memory from imagination. Security footage was re-examined. The cameras had blind spots in the stairwells and certain corners of the hallway. Nothing definitive appeared. But one frame showed a figure moving too quickly to identify, someone whose face was hidden by a hoodie and whose hands were stuffed in their pockets. The timestamp was close to the estimated time of death. Investigators ran the footage repeatedly, trying to catch a clue, but the figure's identity remained a mystery. The knife recovered from David's chest underwent testing. No fingerprints beyond David's were found. There was no trace of DNA that could be linked to anyone in law enforcement databases. It was as if the killer had been careful, precise, and left no trace behind. Detectives theorized that the person had either been extremely cautious or had planned the attack for weeks, studying David's habits and knowing exactly how to approach him without raising alarm. Neighbors reported new details. A delivery person who had been lingering oddly the day before David's death was questioned again. Their alibi checked out. They had been running errands for hours in other parts of the city. Still, the memory of them standing silently in the hallway persisted in some minds. A cleaning crew member mentioned hearing a conversation near David's door, a voice speaking softly, almost whispering, but neither party was identified. It was nothing concrete, just fragments that added weight to the mystery. Investigators examined David's digital life. Emails, messages, and phone calls revealed no threats, no arguments, and no unusual contacts. Everything appeared normal. His work was routine, mostly late-night coding sessions, and no one had reason to want him dead. Yet the fact remained, someone had entered his apartment, stabbed him, and left without a trace. Over the following weeks, detectives tried new tactics. They mapped the comings and goings of every resident, cross-referenced delivery schedules, and even reviewed maintenance records. Each lead ended the same way, nothing connected to a suspect. It became clear that the murderer had either been someone who knew the building well or someone extraordinarily skilled at moving unnoticed. The case began to haunt the residents of the complex. Some avoided certain hallways at night. Others paused when passing David's old apartment, sensing something unsettled about the space. It wasn't just the violent act, it was the quiet precision of it, the fact that the apartment looked undisturbed afterward, as if life had continued normally around a single, unexplained event. Months turned into years. Investigators revisited the case periodically, checking for new tips, monitoring criminal activity in the area, and reviewing security footage from nearby buildings. Each time, the same dead end appeared. No one knew who had killed David Harper, why, or how they had executed the act so carefully. The final strange detail came from the apartment itself. David's front door had been locked from the inside, the lock intact, showing no signs of tampering. The windows were closed, no footprints outside the balcony. The scene suggested a meticulous intruder who knew the layout perfectly, or an impossible scenario no one could reconcile. Investigators speculated quietly among themselves, debating theories that seemed to bend reality: an intruder using the building's maintenance passages, someone disguised, or even something unexplainable that defied logic. Even friends and family could not make sense of it. They remembered David as careful, routine-driven, a man who locked doors, avoided conflict, and trusted few. How such a man could be killed in his home, with no suspect, no motive, and no trace, became a question they asked every day. And then there were the noises. Residents continued to hear them, the soft steps, doors creaking open, fleeting shadows in hallways late at night. Some moved away, unable to stay in a place that felt watched. Others stayed, but the memory of David's death hung in the air, a quiet, unresolved tension that never left. Even now, the case remains officially unsolved. No arrests, no motives, no confession. Only a man found dead in his apartment, a building of neighbors who whisper about what they heard, and a series of tiny inconsistencies that no one could piece together. Every detail, every small shadow, every faint noise lingers in the minds of those who lived through it. David Harper's story does not end with answers. It ends with questions that continue to echo through empty hallways, locked doors, and quiet apartments. A single violent act, executed with impossible precision, leaving behind nothing but a life neatly lived and a mystery that refuses to be solved. And in the silence of that apartment complex, the faintest hint remains: the memory of a man who disappeared in plain sight, leaving only whispers behind.